Hi, everyone who's joining. We're going to give just a couple more minutes for folks to get started, folks to join in before we start moving forward here.
So Rob, while we wait, my folks kind of are trickling in. Where are you located again?
Where am I located? I'm in New York.
In New York. Oh, so it's cold.
It is cold. It snowed last week. It's a little bit better this week, though.
There you go.
Yeah.
See,
and you're in the Bay Area, right?
Yes, I'm in the Bay Area. I'm in California. So when it drops below like 55, I'm in the Bay Area. So like it gets a little bit cold, but not too cold. But yeah, when it drops below 55, everyone's like in a panic. So I know that the East Coast is frigid right now.
I always find the Bay Area so funny that way, and that it's 55, people think it's freezing. If it's like 73, it's a heat wave. It's a very, very short temperature range that people are super happy with.
Exactly.
All right. Well, maybe we'll go ahead and get started. More folks will trickle in as we go. But first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rob Sadow. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Scoop Technologies. For quick background, Scoop, we specialize in enabling teams and companies to succeed at hybrid work. And our customers range from companies at Fortune 100 to hyper growth startups. We provide solutions to facilitate hybrid team coordination, desk assignment, insights on workplace utilization, and workplace safety. So today, I'm incredibly excited that we have Shannon Hardy with us from LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a longtime Scoop customer, a longtime Scoop partner of ours. For quick background on Shannon, Shannon is the VP of Flexwork at LinkedIn. Which is a newish title, I believe, a new role that formed at LinkedIn not too long ago. We'll hear more about that soon. I think you've been at LinkedIn coming up on 10 years now. Is that right, soon?
Yeah, over 9 years. So yes.
And so prior to this role, Shannon's held a number of important roles at LinkedIn, including being a senior director in the HR business partner organization, responsible for global employee relations. By way of background, she received her bachelor's degree in psychology at UC Santa Cruz. And outside of work, as we're fond of talking about, she has a very busy family life with 2 amazing kids who keep her very busy despite being very busy with her day job as well. She's also very committed to supporting causes for impoverished children and for environmental awareness. And so Shannon, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Shannon and I are going to cover a number of topics related to Flexwork and LinkedIn's approach and what they've learned. But we'd love to know what questions are top of mind for you. And so there's a couple of things that we're going to do. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a link that says Q&A. You can submit questions there in the Q&A window. I'll either try and weave them into the discussion as we go, or if we can't weave them in, then we may try and respond in chat as well, so you can get more questions answered. There is also an upvote feature in Q&A. So if you look, there is a thumbs up icon. If you click the thumbs up icon, it upvotes that question. So please do that as well, because it gives us a sense of what questions are most top of mind. We can prioritize those to try and weave in. All right, so to get started, maybe a first kind of question. So you have, Shannon, one of the most interesting titles in my mind that really encapsulates the way the world has evolved in the last couple of years, VP of Flexwork. So what were the discussions at LinkedIn that led to the creation of that role, and what are you responsible for overseeing in this new capacity?
Yes, absolutely. It's a question I get frequently. but I'm super excited to be in this role. So, when the pandemic first started, our CEO at the time, Jeff Weiner, had asked me to lead our response to the pandemic. So I transitioned from being a traditional HR business partner to hyper focused on this, reactive process of addressing a situation, a global situation that none of us have ever had any experience with, to date. And so that really consumed the majority of my time for the first 6 months or so of the pandemic. At that time, I think we had all really hoped that there was going to be like this definitive end date to the pandemic. And so it was like, okay, Shannon, you're gonna be doing this sprint, and you're gonna be able to, work on creating this program, these policies, this, reactionary kind of strategy. It really focused on health and safety, and it will probably end in 6 months, and then you can rotate back into your HR business partner job, helping leaders craft talent strategies for the organization. But 6 months in, 7 months in, we really realized that there wasn't going to be this definitive end date to the pandemic, as well as we were learning a lot about how our employees were working, how they were being, tasked with like overnight, completely shifting how they were productive and how we communicated, how we nurtured relationships. And what we saw was that, wow, there's this opportunity here to craft this new world of work using these learnings. And really what we heard from our employees, because we, listened to them very actively about where they're at and what they need, our employees wanted us to sustain these learnings, whenever the pandemic would end. And that they were really asking us about, hey, LinkedIn, you're on the cutting edge of being, a talent brand, a talent ambassador, and an organization that kind of sets the tone for the industry. How can we, evolve this new way of working? And so at the time, our now CEO, Ryan Roslansky, had said, you know what, Shannon, like this is going to be your new job. So you are going to be tasked with looking at this new world of work, still focused on the pandemic, but how do we evolve our traditional practices around how we get work done? Where do we get work done? How do we collaborate? How do we innovate? How do we build and nurture relationships? I want you to focus on that. And I want LinkedIn to become a leader in the industry and kind of setting the pace, setting the tone, highlighting the possibilities of this. And so, at this time, this was, last fall that I started to work on this, and then officially moved into the role last April. But, it was very much kind of Ryan was kind of leading the way. Folks weren't necessarily thinking about, other organizations weren't necessarily thinking about crafting this role just yet. And so I was, informally in the role, for several months before officially getting the role. And even then it was something where people were like, wow, just like you said, like, hey, that's a really interesting title. We're seeing that title pop up more often now on our LinkedIn platform. And so we're seeing other organizations hyper focus on this. And I think another benefit of having this role is that we have a coordinated effort across the organization to look at the full ecosystem of flex and hybrid work and how it touches every moment of time of the employee life cycle. And like having myself and my team in this position, we're able to have that ecosystem's view where, some organizations have structured it where it's kind of, it's spread amongst many different teams in many different capacities. We've decided to take this kind of, concentrated effort in order to do that. And there's, many benefits of that as well.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think it's a trend I imagine we're going to see a lot as companies starting to appoint more dedicated leaders to be responsible for this new way of working. So you talked a little bit about flex work, and people use different words for this. Some say flex work, some say more hybrid work. It's a term that I think can mean a lot of different things to different people. What does flex work really mean to you?
Totally. So, as you stated, Rob, I'm a mom of two, and being a caretaker in this pandemic, wow, like I've experienced things that I never thought I would experience, like homeschooling and balancing and juggling, work in this new world of work. And so flexibility is actually critical for me, for my personal situation and for my professional situation. And so my flexibility is having the opportunity to drop my kids off from to school and pick them up and then come back home and be able to continue to work virtually. And that means a lot to me. But I think what we've seen is that flexibility is a very broad term, but it means many different things to many different people. And what we've realized, at least at LinkedIn, and I do kind of see this, coming to the surface throughout the industry, is that there is not a one size fits all approach to flexibility. So, myself, I'm a caretaker. You have other individuals who are caretakers of maybe older parents. You have other individuals who don't want to be located near an office and want to work purely remote. You have individuals who, want to be able to take care of their mental health, their physical health. And so they want their hours to be flexible. And so what we've realized is like flexibility means it's a personal and professional interpretation. And we need to have a spectrum of offerings that ensures that we're meeting all of those different needs within an organization.
And when I think about LinkedIn, and I've spent a fair amount of time at LinkedIn offices, going for meetings and spending time there. LinkedIn has such a rich office culture historically, right? A lot of investment in that workplace. And so, what was it that made it feel like flex work was going to be an important strategy for LinkedIn, and such a shift in the way that you think about how you operate?
I think it's a critical piece of our talent strategy. So what we've seen, and I'm sure many of you have heard throughout, many different vehicles of the media, is that workers are now challenging their employers to really let go of long-held assumptions or more traditional ways of working, because the pandemic has proven that we do need to take a moment and to rethink about all of the different learnings and how we work and where we work and how work can be efficiently done, and apply those learnings moving forward. And so workers have really made it very clear via the Great Reshuffle, which all of us have, heard about, in which our CEO, has posted about, or the Great Resignation, which I'm sure is another term that's broadly used. Workers are willing to leave. They're willing to leave an organization that either doesn't match the flexibility that they want, doesn't match the culture that they want, or doesn't really match their personal ethos. And so that is something that is new and that we're seeing very actively, happen and play out across all different industries. And so organizations really need to take a moment in time and think about, okay, what am I hearing from my employees, right? That's the number one thing that organizations can do. Listen to your employees, survey them, ask them what is top of mind for them. And that's going to change over time. But then to figure out, okay, as an organization, how do we meet their needs, but still focused on business performance? And we're also seeing organizations that meet employee needs, that there's an increase in business performance too, because those employees are most likely, to stay. And there's some, quick data points that we have around, if an employee feels that, they're satisfied with the company's time and location flexibility. So specifically just flexibility, they're 2.6 times more likely to report being happy and 2.1 times more likely to recommend working at the company. So not only is that a highly engaged employee, they're also going to tell, their peers in the industry, their friends, their family, like, I love working at this company. You should come work here too.
Yeah, it's a really compelling statistic too. The idea that making that decision can make employees 2.6 times more happy, or much more likely to recommend. So, Shannon, I know you're a pretty data-driven person. LinkedIn's a pretty data-driven organization, right? And so it sounds like you've done a lot of research and conversations with employees around their motivations and how they think about flex work. And so I'm very curious to hear, what are you finding are some of the biggest reasons that LinkedIn employees want to be able to work from home? And what are some of the biggest reasons that people want to be able to come into the workplace?
Absolutely. And we're seeing this not only, at LinkedIn as an employer, but we're seeing it on our platform. So in March of 2020, only every 1 in 67 paid jobs in the US offered remote work. But by the end of 2021, that number went all the way up to 1 in 6. So if you think about that, just an organization's opportunity to offer remote work is something that is kind of like industry standard at this point, not for all jobs, but for jobs where, that individual can be successful and the work can be done efficiently, and, ensure that the business needs are met. But the fact that we're seeing such a high increase in even the offering of remote roles, 1 in 6 now, is just, that is something that shows, again, workers are really, the expectation is that there's going to be a spectrum of offerings. In addition, what we're seeing internally at LinkedIn is that, our hybrid work strategy is that we're going to lead with trust. We're going to trust our employees to make the best decisions on where and how they work, that, it are the best decisions for themselves and their teams. So we're really saying like, hey, listen, you know what you need to do. You know what you need to deliver to the business. You know what your job is. Now we trust that if you want to work remotely, that you have confidence that you're going to be able to do that, efficiently and productively, but also be engaged and happy about that decision. And what we've seen is that we've doubled our remote worker employee population here at LinkedIn. So we went from about a little bit below 2% to now we're tracking towards 5% of the total organization. And that we're seeing our employees who are hybrid, giving them the option to come into the office right now, especially with, certain variants and surges kind of happening. Our employees started to exhibit pre-pandemic behavior. So we saw in specific office locations, we were getting, doubling attendance week over week. And, obviously right now that's changed, but I think that we'll see if we give our employees, again, the spectrum of options of where they work, how they work, when they come into the office, that they're going to exhibit the behavior that we hoped that they would, which is to come in for those purposeful moments of togetherness, and then to be able to get work done virtually that's efficient and productive.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's consistent with a lot of what we've seen at Scoop as well, in that there's a certain amount of comfort in working from home, right? It's a little bit more relaxed, it's casual, you can do things on your schedule, but the workplace continues to be this amazing place to collaborate, right? To go in and feel part of your culture, to be able to socialize. And so it's a big shift trying to get that balance right, but it is super, super important. One thing I thought you said was really interesting in the data, if I understood correctly, is that if we've gone from 1 in 67, I think was the number you said, roles being remote potential, to 1 in 6, I think that basically means that for any given person, there's now 10 times the number of job opportunities, right, that there used to be, right, because of the ability to work remotely. And so it shows the importance of being able to give some of those flexible work opportunities, given how many more employers there are potentially for any given person. One of the things that you and I have talked about quite a bit is just like how big of a change of behavior this is for companies and for teams, in adjusting to what it means to go from being in the workplace as a constant to location being more flexible in terms of where people are working. What are some of the biggest challenges that you found LinkedIn teams struggling with in shifting to more of that hybrid approach to working?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is technology. So, we have used technology in a completely different way than we did pre-pandemic. I think all of us can think about the behaviors that we used to have and how we would interact with our technology when we were primarily in the office, pre-pandemic, to how we do it now. Like you'll see meetings where like the chat is just an amazing way for everyone to participate in a virtual meeting, even if they don't want to verbally say something. Like they're able to still articulate their perspective, their recommendations in the chat. And it seems like virtual is a way to be able to create that experience for everyone. But if you go into the office, then that completely changes. So maybe I'm in the office with 3 or 4 people, and then I have 3 or 4 people that are attending virtually. Like then you start to think about like, what is that equity of experience? How do I ensure that we're using the technology in the same way so everyone feels included in the conversation? I think the other piece too is like, how can technology support us in making decisions on how and where we work? And that could be anything from like calendaring and scheduling. If I'm able to understand if, my boss and maybe some of my executives are going to be in the office next week, and I have a couple of different meetings with them, maybe over the period of like 2 specific days, then I may make a decision to be like, you know what, I really would like to be in the office. I'm a hybrid employee. I'm going to go into the office and I'm going to meet with these individuals because I feel like that's a purposeful moment of togetherness. And then I can craft my schedule of like, hey, okay, I'm going to drop off the kids at this time. Then I'm going to go in. Then I'm going to meet with, my boss. I'm going to have a one-on-one. We haven't had a one-on-one in person in a long time. Oh, and then I'm presenting a recommendation to our executive team. I'd like to, be there in person. And then I'm going to, leave at 2:00 so I can go pick up my kids. And then all of these other meetings, perfect, I can attend virtually. And so if we have technology that enables us to make these decisions more efficiently in save us time, right? Versus me pinging my boss or understanding from the executive assistants who's going to be in the office. I think that would be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, just given the additional overhead, right, that's on teams to try and get that right. So what is some of that kind of like software or tooling that, companies should be considering adopting to help that, support that transition or make it easier on teams to be able to coordinate in the way you're describing?
Totally. I think, I'm obviously involved in active conversations with our teams to evaluate, the communication channels that we use and to test it, both from a virtual perspective and from a hybrid or in-office perspective. Obviously we use Microsoft Teams and whatnot. I know other organizations, obviously Zoom is huge. Some people use Slack, some people use Teams. There's all these different tools. What I would say is take a look at what you're using right now and how that experience is both in the office and at home. And what do we need to do, whether it's the technology or even the behavior, right? We're so used to people raising their hand now in a virtual setting. If, when we start to have more reoccurring hybrid meetings, like what is that going to feel like for the people who are in the office, right? So take a look at that and then evaluate what technology is out there that could help organizations, like Scoop, be able to address some of those issues, right? And so, evaluating what you have right now and then kind of thinking about, okay, what is this next stage going to look like? What is this next cycle going to look like, right? And how can I hopefully, not 100% predict, but anticipate what the employee's needs will be. So that way, when we do have more kind of reoccurring employee behavior, hopefully in between surges or after the surge, hopefully, then we're able to see like, hey, I'm already meeting their needs. Because you don't want employees to have a frustrating experience because that may deter from them starting to exhibit that more, repetitive behavior.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. A good question came in from one of the attendees asking, in this kind of more hybrid or flexible environment, what are some of the things that you can do to help people want to come into the office or feel good about that when they're asked to be coming into the office more regularly? Just curious what you're finding in that push and pull balance between wanting to work from home and wanting to be able to come into the workplace.
Totally. So Brene Brown has her Dare to Lead series, and there is one specific podcast that's on purposeful moments of togetherness. It is such an amazing podcast. I love listening to her, whether she's talking about Ted Lasso, which she has a whole series on, or even, more around leadership. And this idea of a purposeful moment of togetherness is super important. So you want your employee to come into an office when either they're being asked to do so or when they want to, and be able to leave that experience saying, I feel highly engaged. I feel energized. I feel like that was a good use of my time, right? Because I think employees right now are like, ooh, if I can work from home more often, I give up frustrating things like commute time, right? So you want to make sure when they do come in that they walk out of that experience like, awesome, like that was a great meeting. I was so happy I was there in person. And there's ways to do that, which is to work with your teams and work with your senior leaders to, not strictly define purposeful moments of togetherness, but really have a good, robust conversation on what work can be done virtually and has been done very efficiently and productively virtually, and what work makes more sense to be in person. And if that is clear as much as possible, then employees were like, okay, I understand what the expectations are, and you're still giving me some flexibility to, get that work done that can be done virtually, to get it done. So, again, it's that spectrum of offerings and just ensuring that your employees engaged. LinkedIn's very fortunate. We're able to offer additional perks in the office, which has also influenced employee behavior, specifically food. But like the act of sitting with your coworkers and having meetings before lunch and after lunch, and kind of like breaking bread and spending that time to build relationships, seems to be, one of the main attractions for our employees coming to the office. It's like, hey, Rob, I'd love to meet with you in person. You and I are going to do like a whiteboarding session on innovation of like, what we're going to innovate with our next product. But hey, why don't we grab lunch after? And so that seems to be where employees like get a lot of satisfaction, but also just an employee doesn't want to come in to sit at a desk and to do work that they could have done virtually. So have that conversation with your leaders on maybe where you could possibly separate.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's funny, you mentioned commute. One of the things that we find is that there's just this, there's a set of things that you have to do as an employee coming into the workplace that you don't have to do in your home, right? Like you have to commute in, little things like you have to get dressed in a different way, right? Like you have to be on during the day. And so there's just a slightly higher amount of work that's required to go into the workplace. And so in order to, whether you think about it as reward an employee for doing that or incentivize them to want to do it, little things like lunch and snacks, all the way to the idea of how do you make it easier for them, as you mentioned, to coordinate their calendar to make sure that people that they're meeting with are actually going to be there in person, so that they can have those valuable collaborative moments with things like whiteboards that are harder to do virtually, be able to be social together. To your point, I think that there's a huge way of making that feel valuable and making people want to actually come into the workplace. So one of the things I want to talk about in that regard is, one of the interesting things that we've discussed and seen a lot is that flex work or hybrid work actually puts a lot of onus or weight on the people manager, right? As this kind of intermediary, if you will, between the company, the policy that gets set around flexible work, the demands or needs of the team. And so, what are some of the new responsibilities and challenges you find people managers taking on, and how do you support them in that journey?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And I think that people managers have taken on so much in the past, like 18 months, almost 2 years now, whether it's playing the role of, needing to switch and have conversations about individuals, physical health, their mental health, checking in, burnout, to also discussing, kind of having very complex discussions around like, what does flexibility mean for you? And so what we've done at LinkedIn is we encourage our managers just to start the conversation, like ask that question, what does flexibility mean to you? Right? Because, I'm going to answer in one way and Rob, you're going to answer a different way, and I'm sure everyone on this chat, it means something different to everyone. And so a manager just understanding like, what does it mean for my employees is super important. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to meet every single need that employee has, but at least you have context and understanding. And then I think it's about giving managers tools and resources to have these complex, conversations in a productive and compassionate way. So, Satya, LinkedIn's owned by Microsoft. And so Satya had stated like, compassion is the new currency for employers. And I totally agree with that, because I think, again, you don't need to approve every request that your employee is putting in front of you, but you need to at least listen and help them feel heard. And so we have crafted some specific trainings for our managers that break down some of these more complex scenarios. And those scenarios are specific to that function. So, the scenarios for the engineering function are different from the sales function. Obviously, it's two different employee profiles, right? And so myself and my team, we take some of the more complex requests or complex scenarios that get escalated to us, and we break them out by function. And what we're doing now is we're starting with the most senior leaders, and we're saying, hey, let's come together. Let's talk about, change management and how we move through change. And then let's break down and really unpack some of these more complex scenarios so you all can see like how we're thinking about this with alignment to, our global overarching hybrid work strategy. And then having those leaders model that behavior for their leaders, right? And so starting with our most senior leaders first, and then having them model it for their, kind of frontline people managers. And then of course, having tools and resources for our frontline people managers as well. Like we have a whole manager toolkit that provides these resources to our employees. And it could even be like quick videos. We do like 2-minute videos, like, hey, has your employee requested to work from another work location? Here's what you need to know, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or, hey, has your employee asked to go fully remote? Here's what you should be thinking about, 1, 2, 3, 4. So however your employees and your managers consume that information, I would look at different channels and different avenues to do it, but definitely creating a toolkit that will support them, because this is a new skill. They're not having to answer the questions, pre-pandemic that they are having to right now.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that is such good advice, Shannon, the other thing that jumps out to me as you talk about managers is just a need for organizations to have especially senior leadership, to have some compassion and understanding that the role of the manager has just evolved so much, right? And the number of things are being asked to balance and juggle is significantly higher. And so that compassion and understanding, along with the training and best practice development, just feels super, super important. There are a number of interesting questions from attendees, and I've heard this a lot outside of our chat too, around kind of like losing the culture, so to speak, right? And it's like, if people don't come into the workplace, how do you form culture, or how do you make sure that you don't lose the culture? I'm just curious, kind of like, what's your take on that in terms of like, how do you develop culture when you're not all in the workplace? And is that a good argument for why people should be in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that, pre-pandemic, our culture at LinkedIn had a lot to do with the tangible workplace, because you just got this energy when you would come into the office, and you have the opportunity to like run into someone and have a, conversation maybe that you wouldn't have had, or you had the opportunity to attend an in-person all hands that our CEO, would host every 2 weeks. And I know that there's been a lot of concern of like, oh my gosh, are we losing that with not being in the office so much? So I think it's just shifting the way of how you think about it. How do you bring people together? So, we do a couple of different things. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from our employees that the virtual all hands, they love, because before, our headquarters is in Sunnyvale. The CEO would host from Sunnyvale. So if I was in the room with the CEO in Sunnyvale, I'm like, wow, this is great. But if I'm located in Singapore, I'm attending virtually, and I'm like, man, I wish I was, someday I'd love to attend in person, right? Now that we do it virtually, it's like this there's an experience, an equity of experience, right? So it's like identifying those moments, again, purposeful moments. But this one, everyone's like, please continue to do this virtually. We love it virtual, which is great. The other piece too, I think, is, how do you bring different segments of your employee base together, even in a virtual setting? So we do people leader sessions where we do it once a month. We have specific topics. We've never did this before, and it's gone over extremely well. Again, it's large audiences. So, about 1,000 people will attend in North America, and we do them regionally. So they're time friendly for folks, and leaders will get on and give updates, and it's informal. We try to make it a little bit fun. And then we reserve 30 minutes for people managers to ask questions. And again, we got a lot of great feedback that people really love that. And then when there are those moments, to have purposeful moments of togetherness in person, like identifying what those are. And so, I report up to the chief people officer. And so it's our HR team. We went for an offsite, back in November, and the majority of the offsite was spent on team building, right? And getting just a deeper understanding of each other. And so we kind of define that purposeful moment of togetherness to really focus on relationship building, because we can have, a strategy review or prioritization review virtually and do that really well. but we thought that the time best spent in person was just getting to know each other and build that rapport. And so I think there's ways that you can nurture your culture and keep that culture and sustain that culture using both virtual and in person. I think listen to your employees. Like we've asked our employees, when do you want to come together in person? What would you most likely want to do? And we gave them a couple of different options. And resoundingly, people said at this point in time to build relationships. And so if you're able to survey your employees and ask them, when they do want to come together and like how are ways to preserve our culture, you can find out, what they're interested in, what's working, what's not working, and then adjust and pivot as needed.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Shannon. One of the things that jumps out at me as you say that is even the way that you approach this at LinkedIn and ask those questions around, why do you want to be in the workplace and what's most valuable to you? It implies a level of trust, in terms of the way that you think about engaging with employees. And so I know that's a topic that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about in the past. Why does that feel so important, in terms of the way you engage, especially in this kind of like new flexible environment?
Yeah, I think that trust is so critical. We continue to operate in a very fluid environment where I think all of us, had thought, okay, this is what's going to happen in a couple months, or this is what's going to happen in 22. And that continues to challenge us, right? And I think that the trust piece is really, going to your employees with a very humble statement of saying, we don't know what the future holds for us. We think that we can anticipate some of that, but we're not going to be able to answer every single question that you ask of us definitively. We just don't know. That's this new, this new normal. And so coming from a place of trust, like, hey, employees, we trust you, and therefore we hope that you trust us, right? And like that reciprocation of trust is so critical. And when your employees feel like it goes both ways, they're going to be able to make these decisions and really think about it from a company perspective. Like, I'm super engaged. I'm a highly engaged employee at my organization because they treat me really well. Therefore, I'm going to go above and beyond. I'm going to continue to work and do my best for this organization because my commitment, my loyalty to this organization is strong right now because they've treated me so well. They've trusted me to make these right decisions.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, I think, especially in light of what you said earlier, Shannon, around how many more roles are being posted with the remote option and the flexibility around that. Employees really have the opportunity to vote with their feet, in terms of which jobs they take and which jobs they leave. And so that trust just feels super important. And I think, given the right information, the right tooling to be able to coordinate, people will come into the office to be able to do the things that are most valuable in the office, relationship building, certain types of collaboration. But that heavy-handed lack of trust, I think, can create challenges in terms of retention and employee engagement. One question I want to go back, this was something that came up from an attendee, but it relates to the point you were making before on your all hands is a lot of meetings now that team members find that some people are in person, some people are virtual. Have you started to establish any best practices for how to engage teams in a hybrid meeting, and how do you make it so that everybody feels heard or can participate the right way in those kind of more complex meeting setups?
Yes. So, and it continues to evolve. So what we've done is we've been able to craft just like, the top 5 tips for having an effective and equitable hybrid meeting, right? So how do we ensure that the equity of the impact of the experience is the same? Now, not everything's going to be exact, like the exact experience is going to be the same, but the equity of the impact of the experience is really what like myself and my team are focused on. And so it means that behaviors that we've learned during the pandemic, we're going to have to possibly break and learn new behaviors. So everyone very quickly learned how to raise their hand or to have a reaction, right? How to very actively use the chat, how to, ping, everybody pings each other really quickly to have like 2-minute, 5-minute conversations, right? Now in a hybrid work setting, what we've had to do is to evaluate, again, the technology and how we're using the technology in an office setting. So our employees who go into an office, they have to sign on via computer so that they can see the chat and they can raise their hand when they need to. But then they also might dial in via the VC system that's in the room, the conference room that they're in. We realized that the VC system, you couldn't see hands that were raised, you couldn't see the chat. And so it was like super confusing and wait, hold on, someone's got their hand up. And, so what we've asked people for now, until we can figure that technology out, is like, hey, if you're going to attend in person, or I'm sorry, in the office, then you need to sign on with your computer, mute yourself, turn off your video, and then sign on with the VC, just so you can experience the same. And so I think, look at your technology, go in, have someone go into the office and experience it, have someone, virtually attend and experience it, and see, okay, what are the behaviors that we need to do? And then I think, again, identifying those moments where virtual is beneficial, like very large meetings. All of our employees prefer that those large meetings are virtual. There's like an equity that happens when it's virtual. And then maybe those more smaller kind of innovative meetings, smaller team meetings can be done both hybrid or in person, but every organization is going to be different. So identify those moments and maybe how you can start to have just a preferred method of attendance.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Shannon. A couple of the meeting types that we see most commonly come up as being like more valuable in workplace, right, are ones where more human context is valuable, right? Where if you can pick up someone's facial features in a different way, or reactions or tone of voice, like one-on-ones, they're kind of like more personal in nature. Then the other is things that are more complicated, strategy, or things like where you're trying to rapidly go back and forth, maybe you need physical tooling like a whiteboard. Those become more valuable to have, in more in-person or hybrid settings versus different types that can be easier to do virtual. A couple of the things that we've seen as best practices around this too are, one, if you're the in-person part of a hybrid meeting, just being really thoughtful around engaging the folks that are over virtual, right? And so making a point of asking them to participate or ask questions, make sure they get a chance to give input before moving on. And the other is doing a recap that gets sent to all participants afterward of any decisions, action items that came out, just so that if anything was discussed in person after the meeting ended, that the people who were virtual don't lose a little bit of that context. So it's January, just to change course a little bit. And, I always think this is a good time of year to talk about plans and priorities for the year, even though COVID can make that a little bit challenging the last couple of years from planning purposes. But when you think about, your next 12 months, Shannon, and what it's required to make flex work really successful at LinkedIn, what's kind of top of your list, top few things that you're trying to get right, and any sense of how you're going to measure whether or not, you feel like you're being successful with flex work?
Absolutely. So I think, what we've done is we've really approached this in a phased kind of with a phased perspective. So we had 4 phases on how we were going to approach hybrid and flex work and really activate our hybrid work strategy. And the first phase was very focused on foundation setting, right? Like, what is our hybrid work strategy? We need to, align, especially with our executives, on this hybrid work strategy, and then start to put in place the foundation to enable that hybrid work strategy. And that's technology, that's tools, that's resources, it's communication to our employees, et cetera. And that was phase 1. Phase 2 was very focused on building on that foundation, enabling our hybrid work strategy. So we actually had to build different tools, systems, processes that we didn't have before that we needed to. And it was really around the spectrum of, flexible offerings, as well as different programs that we offered during the pandemic that our employees want to make a little bit more permanent, right? And we'd have to, tweak those and adjust those. Phase 3 is very focused on hybrid activation. Like, okay, this is coming to reality. We're seeing employees coming to the office. We're going to continue to see that, post this surge. How do we ensure that equity of experience? How do we ensure our managers have the ability to have these complex conversations? How do we ensure that we are transitioning from a place of reaction? In this phase 3 is really what my team is focused on for the next 6 months. How do we ensure that we're moving from a place of reaction to like proactive strategy setting? So really looking at this new world of work and what we can offer. Also at the same time, transitioning from a place of telling our employees they can, they can't, right, to more of, let me empower you with information, tools, and resources. So again, you can make the best decisions for yourself and your team. And that means kind of helping employees understand like how to live with this continued pandemic. Of course, knowing that we'll transition into an endemic, hopefully, at the end of this calendar year, maybe the beginning of next, but that we want employees to have all of that information and to be able to do their own, kind of personal risk assessment to make these decisions on what's best for themselves and their teams. And then that, that manager and leader acumen is super important. And so we're very focused on that and getting these bespoke toolkits out to our leaders based upon the function. And then the fourth phase, which I see really being for myself and my team, kind of like a July 1 and on, is about maturing this model. So now that we've had this opportunity to really rewrite how workers are working and what they're asking and demanding of us and what we're able to give to them and how we're able to apply these continued learnings of this new way of working to our future of work, how do we mature this model and how do we ensure that it's meeting the needs of our employees?
So it's really interesting, Shannon, to hear you talk about the 4 phases. We see companies across all phases, right? And I imagine a fair number of folks that are joining as attendees today might be in phase 1 or even phase 0 and about to reopen a workplace maybe for the first time. And so, if you're really early in this process and you're just thinking about how do you get started, how do you generate the right conversations internally or put in place the right systems, like what are some of the advice that you would have for companies at that early stage to make FlexWork successful?
Totally. So what I would do is, we really looked at it from 3 specific lenses. The first phase, and the first lens was the sentiment of our employees. Now, the sentiment of employees, again, like you can't give your employees everything that they ask, even if you wanted to, like you can't give them everything on their wish list. But you should listen to them and you should understand what do they want, right? And then take that information and ask questions that are, how engaged are you, right? What are those moments of togetherness that you would like to come into an office for or physically come together for, and provide them with a list of options. Do you feel fully supported re-entering into a hybrid work environment, right? What technology and tools do you use the most to collaborate with your teams? Like just understanding like, what is it that they want and what's their behavior and what's motivating their behavior, just to listen to that. Like, so employee sentiment is number 1. Number 2 is, specific data and evaluation of the roles that you have in your organization and to determine what are the spectrum of flexible options that you can offer to your employees, right? So we did an analysis. We identified 8 different attributes of each of our jobs across the entire organization, and that's things like autonomy, level of decision-making, impact to business, need for specific guidance or direction, location, specificity, and dependence, things like that. And we evaluated all of our roles across the entire organization and said, okay, here are the roles that could be remote or done majority virtually. And then we did identify like a very small number of roles that really needed to be on site, just based upon equipment that they use on site or, the type of work that they do. And again, that was, the second lens. So we were able to get that data and information. Again, it's another data point. And then the third lens is the competitive landscape, your talent competitive landscape. So what are other companies in your specific industry, those who you would, really look at as a talent competitor, what are they doing? Because you don't want to be the only or the one that's not or the one that is, and then like you said, Rob, I love that so eloquently, like, employees are making decisions with their feet, like they're willing to leave. So you don't want to be in a place where all of a sudden you have a retention issue. So you want to know what your talent competitors are doing. Again, they're all 3 data points, but they're data points that I think are useful to look at in aggregate together to make a recommendation on what will be our hybrid work strategy. So we did that process. And I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. One thing, Shannon, also strikes me, I imagine a lot of people are thinking about is Yeah, the pandemic has been so stop-start for so many organizations, right? You think you're heading one way, and then there's a new variant or a new wave, and so how do you make progress or move forward on a roadmap here, knowing that there may be another variant around the corner, and that cases may go up and go down? Like, how do you be a little bit more resilient, I guess, in terms of the way that you approach and moving forward here?
Totally. I think that we've really addressed it with, again, this sense of humility. And we came out to our employees and we said, listen, we're not going to get all of this right. We're going to learn, and we're going to have to, pivot some of our decisions or how we're approaching things, because something new or something different is happening, or something's not working. We're getting feedback from our employees that it's not working. And so with a sense of humility, I think all of the employees, like it brought this moment of almost like, we're all in this together, right? Because to hear an executive say that, like, hey, I'm not able to answer every single question that you have, and I know that that can be frustrating, because we all as humans want, certainty, right? And in the absence of certainty, there can be, anxiety and burnout and fatigue. But we're all in this together. We're going to do our best to be able to provide you with the information that we do have, right? And in a timely, reoccurring fashion. So we do a biweekly email from our chief people officer that does like a COVID update, but also other updates. Our employees love that, and it's consistent. And our employees then, I think, and I hope so, from what we've heard from them, they feel like, okay, like LinkedIn's got my back. And then I think managing, again, we do quarterly surveys. We were doing the monthly at the beginning of the pandemic. Now we do quarterly. And we hear a lot from them. Like, this idea of burnout and fatigue now is coming back, with many folks being sick or having to take care of loved ones who are sick with this surge. And so we're monitoring that. Okay, how do we get tools and resources out to managers to shift work to help, hopefully ease that burden? And then what are the programs that you can offer where employees can take that time that they need in order to focus on themselves or their loved ones? But it is hard, but I think even just humanizing it is so important. And your employees will be like, okay, right? Like, I get it. This isn't ideal, but at least we're in it together.
Yeah, I love that framing. I think that all in it together is so important. Another company we work with had shared that they created a first principle, if you will, for how they talked about implementing flexible or hybrid work and navigating through the pandemic. And one of it was, and the wording was, everyone is responsible for improving this together, right? And I really love the idea, because instead of it feeling like for employees, management or leadership is saying they have the answer, and so we're not part of the solution, we just kind of like are downstream of it. It made it so that it felt like everybody is responsible for improving, and that feedback was welcome. And I think that's at a really nice tone as well. So maybe one more question for you. So if you look out a year from now, and I know that's an almost impossible ask in COVID times, but if you look at a year from now, what's one prediction you might have about flex work or hybrid work that might surprise people?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think that you're going to have, the majority of employers that are going to be leaning into and leading with a more worker or employee friendly talent strategy, right? And that goes for, I think, every single industry. Like, you even see it in like hospitality, where minimum wages are being challenged, where benefit offerings are being challenged, and you have employees kind of calling out or asking of their employer, what can you do for me? You need to do more for me. And so a year from now, I really see the vast majority of organizations crafting their talent strategy with this lens of employees first, which, I think we've started to get there, but I think that this is going to be something that is going to be absolutely more common. And I also think that we're going to see a more dispersed workforce, right? Both in the United States, as well as internationally. And you're going to see remote work be extremely common, not every, but common. And in addition to that, like, virtual is here to stay. And that means that even if I'm a hybrid employee, Like there are going to be moments, again, I want to drop off my kids in the morning. So if I have a super early call, I'm going to be virtual, or I want to come home, me personally, and pick them up and have them here while I continue to work. So virtual is here to stay. And so a year from now, I see, again, employers leading with the talent strategy that has employees at the core. I see, a more dispersed workforce, and that has lots of benefits, like tapping into talent markets that maybe your organization hasn't tapped into before. And then I also see virtual just being a part of our daily lives. So you're going to have folks in the office, at home, at all different times, and it's just going to be completely normalized.
Yeah, super insightful. Shannon, I just want to extend a huge thank you for joining us today. Incredibly valuable. I always enjoy our chats, and it's great to hear about what you're thinking about and what LinkedIn is thinking about. A couple of final notes for folks. So one, we recorded this webinar, and so I'll send a follow-up email afterward with the link so you can access the recording. You can share it with other team members that might be interested. Also, as we mentioned at the start, Scoop specializes in enabling teams and companies to succeed with hybrid work. And so if this is an area of interest for you, you're looking for some support, we'd love to speak with you and learn more about your organization and see if we can be helpful. You can get in touch with us by visiting our website at takescoop.com. You can see it in my background at takescoop.com, and you can book a demo there, or you can email us at business@takescoop.com, and we can set up a conversation that way too. So thanks again, Shannon. Thank you everybody for joining, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.